On that Sunday morning, as I woke up, the weight of my recent breakup came over me. Just a year before, my life revolved around family moments and cozy breakfasts with my kids. Now, those memories seemed distant, replaced by the stark reality of divorce and the struggle to navigate life on my own. Mornings were often the hardest, filled with silence where laughter once was. That day, I felt compelled to leave my apartment, to escape the loneliness. The laundromat had become my refuge, a place where I could blend into the hum of daily life, all while quietly dealing with my emotions. Around 7 on a drab Sunday morning, I forced myself out and into the laundromat, feeling sluggish. I wasn't sure if the weather matched my mood, but it felt like every Sunday in the laundromat was dim and lifeless. I had only started using a laundromat about a year ago. Before that, my wife handled the laundry in our basement laundry room. I moved out a year ago, and 6 months back, she became my ex-wife, leaving the laundry room behind in what used to be my home. My routine now was to go to the laundromat about a mile from my apartment early each Sunday morning. While I didn't love early mornings or laundry, I didn't want this chore to take over my weekend, so I'd get in and out quickly. That way, I avoided the crowd, waiting for a machine, or having to make small talk. After all, weren't Sundays meant for nursing hangovers or reading the paper at leisure? I'd been coming here for about 9 months, and maybe I'd seen her before without paying much attention. But this time was different. The cart she was dragging had a wheel that wobbled slightly, piled high with laundry as she struggled to pull it inside, holding the door open with one hand while steering with the other. I caught this scene as I looked up from the sports section. Being generally decent, I put down the paper, went over and held the door to help her with the cart. She looked up at me with a brilliant smile, showing bright white teeth and warm brown eyes. "Thank you, sir," she said, heading to a line of washers along the back wall. I guess she was around 7 or 8, maybe Hispanic or of mixed heritage. With a head of long, curly brown hair, she was undeniably cute. I turned back, expecting a parent to follow her, but no one did. I felt both uneasy and curious. I watched her load all her clothes into a washer without separating colors from whites, unlike how I'd been taught. She added some detergent from her wagon, dropped in coins, and started the machine. Then she pulled a small stuffed bear from the wagon, took a seat, and started softly talking to it as the cycle ran. From my seat across the laundromat, I could see that her clothes, jeans and a light pink jacket over a long-sleeve shirt, not nearly warm enough for the 20-degree weather, had seen better days. While they weren't dirty, they looked worn. She resembled a street urchin, yet there was a calm about her that seemed out of place. I couldn't believe a parent would send a child this young alone to do laundry. As a parent myself, I sensed something was off about the situation, which brought me back to my own situation. My kids were likely still sleeping, nestled in their warm beds at my old home. When they woke up, maybe an hour or two later, their mom, my ex-wife, would likely have a hot breakfast of pancakes or bacon ready. My 13-year-old son, Ethan, loves bacon, while my 15-year-old daughter, Haley, prefers pancakes. I used to love waffles, but those cozy family breakfasts were quickly becoming faded memories. In the divorce, my ex-wife got custody of the kids, and even though I had visitation rights, she turned them against me, blaming me for our broken family. My kids wanted nothing to do with me and made that clear the few times we were together. My crime? Not sitting by while my wife planned to cheat on me with another man during a couple's weekend getaway, a wealthy guy who routinely slept with other men's wives. She'd told me her plan, insisting it wouldn't be cheating since she was upfront about it, and afterward, she'd come back faithful to me. But she warned that if I resisted, she'd take half my money, half my things, the house, and would ruin my relationship with the kids. When I refused, she followed through, putting all the blame on me. The kids believed her completely. I was left with nothing. Thinking about those family breakfasts made me realize how hungry I was since I hadn't eaten anything since the last Brat and Mickey's malt at the bar where I'd been watching the Knicks game. On one wall was a shabby vending machine with a Coke machine next to it. I was sure the laundromat's owner must collect the money from both daily, or they'd have been broken into by now. I bought a pack of M&Ms and a Diet Coke. As I grabbed the soda, I glanced over at the little girl. She seemed to be watching me, but then I realized it was actually my snacks that held her attention. As a dad myself, seeing the look on her face as she eyed my snacks tugged at my heart. I walked over to her and quietly asked if she'd like my Diet Coke and M&Ms. She perked up, sitting up straight, but then her face fell, and she declined. "Mommy says I'm not supposed to take food from strangers, especially men," she explained. "That's a great rule, and you should always listen to your mom," I agreed. "Tell you what, I'll just leave the soda and M&Ms on the chair next to you, and you can take them if you want. I'll go grab myself more and head back to my seat. I set the snacks down, got another Diet Coke and M&Ms from the machines, and returned to my seat, casually watching her over the top of my paper. About 5 minutes later, she picked up the soda and M&Ms and dug in. I smiled to myself. I left about 90 minutes later after folding my laundry and loading it into the car, fully preoccupied with my own plans for the rest of the day. I didn't think about her again until the following Sunday at the laundromat around 7 a.m., when I wondered if she'd show up again. Sure enough, about a half hour later, she arrived, pulling the wagon heaped with clothes once more. I held the door open and she thanked me before heading to the machines along the back wall. I noticed she was wearing the same clothes as the previous week. Once she started her load, I approached cautiously, sitting down beside her. I noticed you're having trouble with a back wheel on your wagon. Would it be okay if I tried to fix it? She nodded, playing with her bear. I flipped the wagon over and saw the back right wheel had bent on its axle. I straightened it out by hand, then rolled the wagon back and forth to check. Fixed. My little friend looked impressed. I'm Alex Rogers, by the way, I said, holding out my hand. She extended hers with all the dignity she could muster, and replied solemnly, Maddie Ruiz, very pleased to meet you, sir. Well, now that we've met, we're not strangers anymore, I said. How about a soda and some candy? Could I have a real Coke this time? She asked, her eyes wide with hope. Sure thing. 1 real Coke for you, a Diet Coke for me, and M&Ms for both of us. We sat and talked for almost 2 hours. I fetched a pad and pen from my car to teach her tic-tac-toe. She picked it up quickly, and I let her win a few times, just like I used to with my kids. I drifted off for a minute, thinking about playing games with my children. Then, my thoughts wandered to the memory of my then-wife, Tracy, looking me in the eye and telling me she planned to spend the night with Robert Goldstein III, a big city lawyer, on the night my life as I knew it ended. It's just one night, Alex. It won't mean anything. It'll just be physical, she'd said. What? Are you serious? It's not just physical. It'll be the end of our marriage, I shouted back. Don't be like that, Alex, she'd argued. Don't throw away 18 years over one night. I could have done this behind your back, and you'd never have known. Just let me have this. Then, taking Robert's hand, she'd gone with him to his room in the cottage. I stood there, stunned for what felt like hours, but was probably just a minute before gathering my things and leaving. Alex, it's your turn. Maddie's voice pulled me back to the present. I marked an X in one of the boxes, giving her the chance to get 3 O's in a row for the win. She proudly drew a line through her trio. High five, kid, I said, holding my hand up out of her reach. She looked at me, then stood on her chair to reach my hand and complete the high five. Gotcha, she said with a grin. I stayed at the laundromat until Maddie's clothes were washed and folded. I offered to drive her home, but she declined, saying, Mom's rules. Your mom sounds smart. I'd like to meet her someday, I said. Well, maybe someday. She doesn't go out much, Maddie replied. As winter turned to spring and then summer, my routine with Maddie continued. I started bringing a small bag with a sandwich for each of us, along with some snacks, and would buy the soda at the laundromat. I wasn't really hungry that early, but I figured if I ate a sandwich, she would too. She was so thin. Soon I began packing an extra sandwich, telling her it was for her mom. She never refused, always thanking me politely. By this time, Maddie had told me she was 7 years old and would be starting 2nd grade in our neighborhood elementary school in the fall. There was no father in her life. She had never even met him. Her mother worked part-time during school hours, though Maddie didn't know the details. Her mom was always home when Maddie got back from school. They mostly stayed indoors, going to the park occasionally when the weather allowed. She mentioned watching a lot of TV, and she was familiar with all the recent animated movies, though I couldn't name a single one. Money seemed tight for them, but Maddie said her mom sometimes went on dates on Saturday nights, leaving her after dinner with instructions to put herself to bed by 9 p.m. On Sunday mornings, her mom would give her money for 1 washer and dryer load and send her off to the laundromat with her little wagon. Truthfully, my life wasn't much better than Maddie's at this point, although I at least had enough to live on. With child support, mortgage, and alimony, my salary as a lead computer programmer didn't stretch far. My social life was limited to the occasional night at a bar with friends. I didn't date anymore, and I didn't miss it. What I missed was my kids. Until I remembered how they'd treated me after Tracy and I separated. I preferred thinking of happier memories with them, though reality always seemed to jolt me back. Where are you? Tracy yelled when I answered my phone the morning after I'd left Robert Goldstein's lake house. My phone said 10:06. The last time I'd checked, it was 2:13. and I'd been pouring another shot of Eagle Rare bourbon. I must have eventually crashed in the bedroom. "You left me stranded here at the lake house. How am I supposed to get home?" she demanded. "Find a ride with Robert Goldstein III. I snapped back and hung up on her, frustrated that hanging up on a cell didn't have the same impact as slamming down a landline would have. The next Sunday, Maddie arrived about 15 minutes later than usual, this time without her wagon of clothes. Tears streaked her face, and I worried she'd been robbed. She clutched her teddy bear under her arm. "Mommy didn't come home last night, and I don't have any money for the laundry machines," she said when I walked over. "Does that happen sometimes?" I asked gently. She shook her head, her big brown eyes filling with tears. "Mommy always comes home. It's one of her rules." I calmed her down and gave her the food I'd brought for her. I was in unfamiliar territory here and wasn't sure what to do. "Is there someone you can stay with until your mom comes back?" I asked. She shook her head no, with a mouthful of peanut butter and jelly. I knew I couldn't leave her alone in her apartment, but if I called the authorities without a plan, she'd likely be in foster care within a day, and her mother might lose custody if they decided she wasn't providing adequately. I already had my doubts about her situation. "How about we go to your apartment and leave a note for your mom saying we're at my place? She can call me when she's back and I'll bring you home." She seemed to weigh this option carefully. It was against her mom's rules, but with her mother not home, she didn't seem eager to spend the day alone. She finally nodded in agreement. After folding my clothes and putting them in the car, we headed to her apartment. We didn't gather much since there wasn't much to gather. Her few clothes were either on her or among the laundry waiting to be washed. I told her we'd stop somewhere, and I'd get her a few things, including a toothbrush and hairbrush. She gave me a small, sad smile. I left a note with my name and number on the kitchen table. Then we went to get Maddie a few necessities. I let Maddie pick out a few tops, jeans, some underwear, and socks at a nearby Dollar General. She was absolutely delighted, but I couldn't stop wondering what I'd do if her mother didn't come back soon. We spent the day watching cartoons in the Disney Channel. I made us lunch and dinner, then put her to bed on the sofa in my spare room at 9 p.m. I planned to take a personal day from work the next day to figure things out. On Monday, Maddie and I returned to her apartment after lunch, but there was no sign that anyone had been there since we left the day before. I searched around and found a drawer in her mother's dresser with some paperwork. Among the useful items, I found Maddie's birth certificate, which didn't list a father. Her mother's name was Fiona Ruiz. I also found a photo of Maddie and her mother. The photo seemed to be taken when Maddie was around 2 years old, just a toddler. They were hugging for the camera. Fiona, with the same long, curly brown hair as Maddie, looked to be in her mid-20s. Both were smiling, but Fiona's eyes held a hint of sadness and exhaustion. I wondered if that look had deepened over the years. Maddie quietly watched me go through her mother's things. I tried to keep the conversation light, explaining that I was looking for something that could help us find her mom. She seemed to accept that explanation. Back at my apartment, I turned on the Disney Channel and settled Maddie in front of the TV. Then, I went to my room, called the police, and reported Fiona Ruiz missing. I didn't have much information for the officer, only that I felt something serious must have happened for her to leave her child alone. "And is the child alone in the apartment now, sir?" the officer asked. "No, she's with me. I'm about the closest friend she has, and I'd be happy to keep her with me until things are sorted out. If you're willing to do that until Child Services contacts you, we'd appreciate it," the officer replied. I worried about Maddie ending up in foster care. From what I'd heard, foster care wasn't always a positive experience, and I knew I could provide for her if I was allowed to. While considering my options, I remembered that my boss's wife, Darlene, had connections in social services. Maybe I could ask for a favor. I'd worked for my boss for 20 years, and we'd developed a strong professional relationship. He and Darlene had been supportive during my divorce, so I felt comfortable reaching out. Darlene Laster arrived at my apartment about 20 minutes after I spoke with her husband, saying she wanted to make a new friend. I introduced her to Maddie, and within 5 minutes, Darlene had Maddie enchanted, and vice versa. After an hour, Darlene hugged me and promised she'd do everything possible to help keep Maddie with me. Later that day, 2 police officers stopped by. They didn't seem very optimistic about finding Fiona Ruiz. I gave them a copy of the photo of Maddie and her mother. On Tuesday, I returned to work and enrolled Maddie in our company's daycare program. Darlene had helped set it up about 15 years ago. I hadn't needed it for my kids since Tracy stayed home with them. But now, as a single parent, it was a lifesaver. Until school began, I'd bring Maddie to work with me each morning, have lunch with her, and take her home at night. It turned out to be a great setup. Having Maddie around eased the pain of my own kids' absence. I rarely saw them, and when I did, it was typically just for a meal at a restaurant. I never brought Maddie along, leaving her with a neighbor, Mrs. Olivares, so my kids wouldn't show her the hostility they showed me. Maddie was a refreshing presence in my life. She and her mother didn't get out much due to limited funds, so everything we did together felt like a new adventure to her. The first time we went to a sit-down restaurant, someplace nicer than McDonald's, she was captivated, as if visiting another world. When we went to the park and I bought her a pretzel and soda after she'd played, she acted as if it was the grandest treat. Her smile lasted a whole week, and I smiled right along with her, listening to her excitement. She began teaching me Spanish. She was bilingual, and she'd laugh heartily at my frequent mix-ups. Once I accidentally ordered a horse and a Coke at McDonald's, and she laughed so hard that she had tears in her eyes. In her innocent way, it never occurred to her that most people didn't speak two languages. I kept Maddie in her previous school for second grade since it was the simplest option for the school system. With her birth certificate in hand, they didn't ask many questions when I listed myself as her contact and used my apartment as her address. I never heard anything further from the police about Maddie's mother, nor from any social services about placing Maddie in foster care. Either Darlene pulled some serious strings, or the city had so many open cases they didn't focus on Maddie and me. With Maddie staying with me, my cooking skills improved, because grabbing a pizza and beer wasn't a suitable dinner anymore. We began watching cooking shows together and tackled recipes as a team in the kitchen. I never cooked with my own kids. Tracy was a fantastic cook. But with Maddie's help, I was learning and even enjoying it. We had a blast in the kitchen together. I won't pretend everything was perfect. We had our disagreements and challenges like any other family, but that was just it, like any other family. After being together a little over a year, Maddie and I had formed our own version of a family. I realized just how strong our bond had become at the start of her third grade year during a school open house. While walking through the hallway, we met one of Maddie's friends and her parents. Maddie's friend introduced her parents as my mom and dad, and then Maddie introduced me as her dad. I hadn't thought about us in that way, and hearing her call me Dad filled me with indescribable joy. I choked up, claiming I had something caught in my throat. Maddie noticed, giving me a knowing look and squeezing my hand. From then on, she never called me Alex, and I couldn't have been happier. I was so wrapped up in being a parent again that I didn't even notice I hadn't dated in over 2 years, until Maddie brought it up one day at the grocery store. We were walking down the aisles when we passed a petite woman in the produce section. I didn't think anything of it, but Maddie did a double take. "Wow, Dad, that's a really pretty woman. You should ask her for a date," Maddie said. I was checking the shopping list and stopped, taking a good look at the woman. She was indeed beautiful. She happened to look up right then, and we exchanged a shy smile. "Well, aren't you going to talk to her, Dad?" Maddie asked, looking expectantly at both of us. I wanted the ground to swallow me up, but decided to give it a shot. "Hi, I'm Alex. This is Maddie. As you just heard, Maddie thinks I should ask you out or something," I said, stumbling over my words. "What do you think?" she asked, meeting my eyes with a warm smile. I stammered, completely captivated by her caramel-colored skin, bright smile, and kind eyes. She looked about 5'2", maybe 110 pounds, around 35 years old. Though she wore a light jacket, I could tell she had a nice figure, and I noticed her left hand was ring-free. I wondered if Maddie had spotted that detail. "Would you like to have dinner with us sometime? All of us? Or just you and me, if you prefer?" "Smooth move, Romeo," Maddie teased in Spanish. "That's a clever way to have your daughter scout for you in the grocery store," the woman joked as I turned red. "No, honestly, this wasn't planned. I'd never do that." "Sure, Romeo, whatever you say. But yes, I'd love to have dinner with both of you. I'm Cherry Roberts, by the way." "Seriously? It was that easy? I should have had Maddie helping me ages ago," I said, chuckling. We planned dinner for the following Saturday. She liked Italian, so Maddie and I prepared some of our favorite recipes. After exchanging numbers and giving her my address, Maddie and I finished shopping and fist-bumped as we rounded the corner. "Yeah, no setup, right?" she called after us. The week dragged on until Saturday finally arrived. Maddie and I cleaned the apartment, then got to work making homemade lasagna, garlic breadsticks, salad, and tortoni for dessert. Cooking helped settle my nerves, because, truthfully, I was as nervous as could be. It had been over 20 years since my last date. Then it hit me hard. I hadn't dated in 20 years. My last dates were with Tracy, and I had to think to recall anyone before her. I think it was Marianne Rizzo. Last I'd heard, she married the next guy she dated after me. I wondered if they were still together, or if their marriage had ended like mine. "Take it easy, man," I told myself. "It's just a date. No need to think about marriage already." It wasn't just me who was excited about the evening. Maddie seemed just as energized. She stuck by my side, helping as we cleaned and cooked. I hadn't realized it until then, but Cherry was our first visitor who wasn't Mrs. Olivares or a child under 10. Dinner went well, in my opinion. It was a bit nerve-wracking initially, but having an 8-year-old around is a great icebreaker. My mom wasn't married either. "Have you ever been married, Cherry?" Maddie blurted out as I handed Cherry a glass of Galliano soon after she arrived. Cherry and I both blushed at Maddie's question. Then Cherry looked directly into Maddie's eyes and answered gently, "I was married to a wonderful man, sweetheart. But that's in the past." For a moment, I saw a trace of sadness and pain in her expression. "Dad used to be married too. And he has 2 other kids besides me," Maddie continued. I decided it was best to give Cherry a brief overview of my marriage, divorce, and how Maddie came to live with me. She listened quietly, her face reflecting empathy. She and Maddie both seemed emotional when I mentioned Maddie's mother not coming back. Maddie quickly lightened up and asked Cherry about her name. "That's a cool name, Cherry. I bet your parents were a lot of fun," Maddie said. "That's actually a funny story," Cherry replied. "My real name is Marcella, and I used to go by Sella. But one day, my little brother spotted a box of Sella's chocolate-covered cherries in a store and started calling me Cherry. The name stuck, and now everyone calls me that. It fits you much better than Marcella," I chimed in. "Marcella makes me picture thick glasses and a sturdy look." "Ouch, that's harsh," Cherry laughed. "You're never allowed to call me by my full name." Cherry stayed with us until Maddie's bedtime at 9, then said it was time for her to go. I hoped she genuinely enjoyed herself, as she suggested that next time we should have dinner at her place. She gave me a quick kiss on the lips as she left. For a fleeting moment, I thought I caught a hint of attraction in the air, but maybe it was just wishful thinking. "I like her, Dad. I think she'd be a good fit with us," Maddie said after I closed the door. I had to admit to myself that the kid might be onto something. For the next 5 Saturdays, we had family date nights, and I think we all enjoyed them. But I knew I needed to try going out with Cherry alone to see where things might lead. Maddie took it well when I told her I was taking Cherry out to a restaurant, just the 2 of us, and that she'd spend the evening with Mrs. Olivares. I wasn't about to leave her home alone as her mother had done. I would never criticize Maddie's mom directly to her, but leaving an 8-year-old alone while going on a date was not something I'd ever do. Maddie and I both understood all too well that things hadn't gone well the last time she'd been left alone. For our alone date, as Maddie called it, I made reservations at a nice steakhouse. I could tell the mood would be different as soon as I arrived at Cherry's door. She wore a silky fitted dress with a bit of a neckline and a length that made her short legs look a little longer. She wore a touch more makeup than usual and a new, subtly spicy perfume. Wow, and I forgot to bring my shield. "How am I going to fend off all the other men tonight?" I joked. "If you think that smooth talk will get you anywhere, well, you just might be right," she replied with a laugh. We had a wonderful meal and shared a more adult conversation without Maddie there, though it felt strange not to have her along. "You're missing her, aren't you?" Cherry asked, looking directly into my eyes. "Kind of," I admitted. "We're together all the time outside of work and school, and I don't mind one bit. You must miss your older kids too," she added. "Terribly. But with the attitude they've shown since the split, it's hard. They don't seem willing to see things from my perspective. My ex has really turned them against me." "You seem like you'd make a great dad," she said. "If you don't mind me asking, how come you never had kids?" "I don't mind," she replied. "We were thinking about it until I made the biggest mistake of my life. I disrespected my marriage and had an affair purely for the excitement. It was a foolish decision that tore apart the person I loved most in the world. I'll never make that mistake again if I'm ever given a chance to love someone that way again." Cherry's voice faded as she said the last part, but I caught every word of her barely audible whisper. Her eyes filled with tears, which she tried to blink away. I handed her my napkin, and she gently dabbed at her eyes. "I'm sorry if I brought you somewhere you'd rather not go," I said softly. "I've never actually talked about it with anyone before," she admitted. "Not even my parents. I'm just so ashamed." "Well, enough heavy talk," I said. "Let's get out of here and see if you've got any moves on the dance floor, Missy." "Missy, do I look 12 to you?" she joked. "Actually, I guessed 35, but since I'm 44, you're practically a kid to me," I replied. "Really? 35? She sounded genuinely pleased. "I'm actually 42. I was married for 12 years and I've been divorced for 9. You're really great for a girl's ego." "No way you're only 2 years younger than me. I look like I could practically be your older brother," I laughed. I paid the check and we headed to a dance club that Tracy and I used to visit sometimes. I'm no Fred Astaire, but Tracy enjoyed dancing, so one of the first things I did when we had some extra money was to take dance lessons. I learned quickly that watching your wife dance with other men from the sidelines didn't make for a fun night. Cherry was light on her feet and just as easy on the eyes. We danced to both fast and slow songs for about half an hour before I needed a break. Cherry looked like she could have kept going, but she followed me off the floor, and we found a stand-up table. I headed to the bar, and as soon as I left, the first vulture swooped in. I watched from the corner of my eye, trying to stay subtle. Cherry laughed at something he said. It must have been somewhat funny. But she didn't move from the table, which pleased me more than a little. When I handed her the margarita I'd brought back, she took a sip. Soon after, vulture number 2 approached, a guy around 25 who nodded at me but then turned straight to Cherry to ask if she wanted to dance. "Excuse me, but the lady is with me." "I don't appreciate disrespect, especially from kids," I said calmly but firmly, keeping a smile on my face. I knew that smile didn't reach my eyes, and he seemed to catch the hint. "Sorry, man, I didn't realize you two were together," he mumbled, backing off. We finished our drinks and headed back to the dance floor, staying out there for another 30 minutes. At one point, another young guy tried to cut in, but he had the sense to ask me first. When I told him no, he nodded, shook my hand, and said, "Can't blame a guy for trying. She's beautiful." We returned to our table for another drink. As we were finishing, yet another guy approached, asking if he could dance with Cherry. I was tired, but figured that if she wanted to keep dancing, I'd let her go. She shook her head, and I broke the news to him. Afterward, I took her home, and she invited me in for a bit since it was only 10:30. I accepted, and we each had a glass of wine, chatting comfortably for another hour. When I finally stood to leave, she stood with me, and I must have looked hesitant because she gave me a little giggle, the sound of which I was really beginning to love. I blushed, and she could see I was in deep. "Don't worry, Alex. There's no rush here, is there?" she said softly. 2 weeks later, I broke my 2-year dry spell in my bedroom. It wasn't anything wild. Maddie was asleep in the next room, but I can't express how good it felt to be with someone again. It didn't last long, but Cherry seemed just fine with that, especially since I'd made sure she was fully satisfied before I was. The experience felt as natural as riding a bike. Though I hadn't planned on it, Cherry ended up spending the night. She curled up against my chest and we both slept soundly. In the morning, she slipped on one of my white dress shirts, covering what was necessary but still looking effortlessly attractive. We went to the kitchen and soon Maddie joined us, squealing when she saw Cherry was still there. She ran over and leaped into Cherry's arms, almost knocking her over. They hugged, clearly thrilled to see each other. I couldn't help rolling my eyes at the sappy sweetness of it. "Pancakes! Pancakes!" they both shouted together. "Chocolate chip pancakes!" I called back. 6 months later, Cherry moved in with us, and we became our own version of a 21 St. Century family. Despite still paying alimony and child support, I made a decent living, and Cherry worked at an accounting firm, so we were doing well. Maddie never went without, though she rarely asked for much anyway. Growing up with little made her appreciative of everything she had, and in her eyes, it seemed like more than enough. After all, everything is relative. While we might have been a modern-day version of the Brady Bunch, we looked more like a current take on the Odd Couple, or, in our case, the Odd Trio. We were black, white, and Hispanic, each with a different last name. Some of that changed when I registered Maddie for 4th grade that fall. I listed her as Maddie Ruiz Rogers. She was with me at registration, and her eyes lit up when she saw what I'd written. She didn't say anything until we left the school, and then she nearly burst with excitement. "I can be a Rogers like you, really?" she squealed. "Not legally, at least for a few more years," I answered. "But by Rogers rules, you're eligible to join the club." I made air quotes around Rogers rules, but that didn't hold her back. She jumped into my arms and started kissing my cheeks. After a few seconds of celebrating, Maddie pulled back with a thoughtful look. I was surprised until she spoke up. "When does Cherry get to be a Rogers?" she asked. "You know, that's a great question. I'm going to have to think about that seriously." And I did. In fact, on the 1-year anniversary of our first date, I had Maddie stay with Mrs. Olivares while I went to the jeweler I used to visit when buying gifts for Tracy. Cherry had told me she'd be home late and would grab her own dinner, so I figured I had a couple of hours to pick out the perfect ring. It was a little after 6 when I left Jean Horowitz Jewelers, having just designed a custom engagement ring with Jean's daughter, Jolene. I called in a pizza order for Maddie, Mrs. Olivares, and myself and drove over to my favorite pizza place in a small shopping center. As I was about to step out of the car, I noticed a small but stylish restaurant a few doors down, and that's when my world seemed to collapse for the second time. Walking into the restaurant, Hand in hand with a good-looking man in his 40s, was Cherry. She looked animated and genuinely happy. I sat there staring, unable to move, or breathe, or think. I don't know how long I sat in my car before realizing I hadn't taken a breath in a while and was on the verge of passing out. I took a few deep breaths, then decided I needed to get Maddie's dinner. So I went in, picked up the pizza, and drove home in a fog. I barely remember the evening until Cherry came home around 8. She was still lively and seemed to be in a great mood as she walked through the door. "Hey, you're never going to guess who I ran into tonight. My brother John surprised me by coming into town without telling me, and after I finished work, he took me out to dinner. I figured since you guys were having pizza, it'd be fine for me to catch up with him." Cherry stopped speaking when she saw the look on my face. "That's the story you're going with?" I asked quietly. Cherry looked stunned, replaying my words in her mind. "You went to Salvatore's for pizza tonight, and you saw me with him, didn't you? And you thought, 'You've got to be kidding me!'" she yelled. I was caught off guard. I'd expected guilt or an apology, not anger. This didn't feel like any apology I'd ever experienced. Cherry had never raised her voice at me, but now I could see she might have a good reason. "You don't even trust me enough to give me the benefit of the doubt," she continued. "I know I lost my husband because I cheated on him. I told you that, all of it, and I told you I'd never make that mistake again. I understand your ex-wife left you with trust issues, but that's between you and her. Don't ever treat me that disrespectfully again, or I'll be gone before you can blink." I noticed Mrs. Olivares had quietly let herself out when Cherry started yelling, and I saw Maddie retreating to her room. I wished the sofa would just swallow me up, but no such luck. "You're right," I admitted softly. "I let the distrust that Tracy left me with spill over onto you. You are your own person, and if I can't respect that, then I don't deserve you." I hadn't planned to tell her about the ring just yet, but after such a major mistake, I had to go all in. Cherry was glaring at me with a look that could have knocked me over. "So, I know this isn't the best timing, but I need to show you how much I really do value you. Give me your left hand." She slowly came over and held out her hand, palm up. I gently turned it palm down, slipped a piece of paper around her ring finger, and secured it with a rubber band from my pocket. She looked confused. "What?" she began, pulling the paper off her finger and unfolding it to read. "You lousy jerk," she squealed. "Seriously?" Cherry then gave me the most passionate kiss I'd ever experienced, more intense than anything with Tracy. When we finally stopped, she called for Maddie to come out. "Look, baby, look," she said, showing Maddie the receipt for the ring. "I'm going to be a Rogers too." The joyful squeals of both Maddie and Cherry rang through the room in a pitch almost too high for comfort, but I held on as they danced around. After they settled down, Cherry pulled out her phone, grinned, and said, "You better come over here and meet your soon-to-be brother-in-law." Maddie ran to get Mrs. Olivares back so Cherry could show off her ring, and the apartment felt like Christmas morning chaos when Cherry's brother arrived. He was as strikingly handsome as Cherry was beautiful. Looking at him again, I couldn't help but feel relieved that he was her brother, not a suitor as I'd initially feared. After Cherry introduced us, he extended his hand but then pulled me into a bear hug. "Handshakes are for friends, and while I hope we'll be friends, hugs are for family," he said. "And they're also to show you that if you hurt her, I'll squeeze the life out of you. Got that?" He tightened his grip slightly with that last part, and I got the message, loud and clear. "Uh-huh," I whispered, a bit breathless. Cherry gave him the quick rundown of everything that had led to my giving her the ring. He looked at me with mock surprise, at least I hoped it was mock, and said he was glad I was still alive. "She gave you that laser death stare, didn't she?" John asked. "Yeah, that look has been known to kill." Both Maddie and Mrs. Olivares chimed in that they were smart enough to leave the room when they saw it. Then John turned to Maddie, looked her over, and said, "So this is the famous Maddie Rogers. I've always wanted some nieces and nephews. I think you'll do nicely." Maddie smiled shyly at first, then her face lit up. "Does this mean I get to call you Mom?" she asked Cherry. Cherry didn't respond with words. Instead, she dissolved into tears and reached for Maddie. The two stood there in a long embrace, each shedding their own tears for their own reasons. Even with Darlene's help, the state made us wait until Maddie turned 16 before we could legally adopt her. By that age, she could have filed for emancipation and gone off on her own, but neither Cherry nor I worried about that. The state's permission only formalized what Maddie, Cherry, and I had already built years before. Family isn't always about blood or legalities. Then, unexpectedly, I hadn't heard from either of my kids since our last meeting more than 6 years ago, so I was stunned to hear Haley's voice on the other end of the line. I hadn't checked the caller ID and answered as usual. Alex Rogers. Dad, it's me, Haley, she said quickly. Please don't hang up. Relax, kiddo. I would never hang up on you or your brother. Is something wrong? No, Dad. Everything's good. Really great. I'm getting married next month, and I'd like to invite you to the wedding. I was speechless. This was my little girl, yet I was so out of touch that I hadn't even met the man she was marrying in just 1 month. The last time I spoke with my kids was just after Ethan's 16th birthday. We went to his favorite restaurant to celebrate, but neither of them seemed interested in conversation despite my attempts. Finally, just after ordering dessert, Ethan spoke up. Dad, I'm 16 now, and the court-ordered visits are over. Haley and I don't have to see you anymore if we don't want to. And we talked it over. We don't want to see you. You left us to keep your pride intact. Well, you can take your pride and shove it. I had to give it to him. He kept calm, though he couldn't quite meet my eyes. Haley just glanced back and forth between us, unsure. I sighed, knowing this moment would come. This was Tracy's doing. It had her influence all over it. I'm assuming you know what wedding vows are, and that your mother not only broke ours, she threw them in my face. But she's convinced you both that I'm the bad guy, and nothing I say will change that. But to me, breaking our vows isn't something I can just ignore, like a dent in the car. It cut right to my core. While I knew that leaving would hurt you, staying would have been worse because it would have destroyed who I am. You'd eventually see the difference and understand it someday. This was your mother's mistake, and she's made me the scapegoat. I won't take that blame. But if this is truly what you want, Dad, Haley's voice brought me back to the present. Don't you want to come? Very much so, Haley. I've even saved up for this day. You don't have to worry about the money, Dad. Bob has it covered. Bob? I asked, piecing it together. Is this Robert Goldstein III? Her tone grew a bit frustrated, then softened with pity. Apparently you didn't know. Mom married Bob about 6 years ago after we stopped seeing you. So the man who ruined my marriage, broke my relationship with my kids, nearly drained me financially, and then marries my ex-wife? And you say it's all about my pride, Haley? Anytime Ethan wants to apologize... Don't be that way, Dad. I'm not inviting you to start trouble. You won't be giving me away or sitting up front with the family. I just want you there, okay? All right, Haley. On one condition, that I can bring my family with me. Your family? Yes, even someone like me gets to have a family, Haley. I have a wonderful wife and an amazing daughter. You'd like them if you got to know them. Haley seemed taken aback. I'd never told her or Ethan about Cherry and Maddie. I hadn't wanted Tracy to find out. You have another kid? Does she know about me and Ethan? She asked, sounding almost in a daze. Maddie's 16. She's adopted. She's been with me for 9 years. I almost literally found her on the street. She knows all about you both, what we once had, and what we don't have now. She's fun, full of life. She went through her own hardship, and we helped each other at a really low time in our lives, almost as if it were meant to be. Well, then, I look forward to meeting the rest of the family, Haley said, seeming to come to terms with the news. The wedding took place on a Saturday evening at a rather upscale venue, fitting for the daughter of a well-established lawyer. I had to give Bob some credit. He hadn't cut corners for his stepdaughter's big day. The ceremony itself was held in a beautiful, historic church in the city. Cherry, Maddie, and I timed our arrival to just before the service started and took seats in the back row. This timing helped us avoid early socializing with old friends and family. And when Haley and her new husband Mark walked down the aisle after the ceremony, she blew me a kiss. At the reception, we arrived in time to claim a table toward the back of the hall. It may not have been entirely fair to Cherry and Maddie, who'd both put effort into their appearances. Friday was a girls' spa day, and they'd each bought new dresses. Cherry looked sophisticated and elegant, and Maddie, who wore full makeup for the first time, appeared 16 going on 21, the classic father's dilemma. But they respected my wishes, and didn't complain when we settled in with glasses of wine for Cherry and me, and a Coke for Maddie. As I'd anticipated, friends from the past gradually stopped by our table to say hello and catch up once they spotted me. Soon, Tracy's parents, Rhonda and William, joined us. Rhonda's eyes filled with tears as she leaned in for a hug, and William gave me a warmer handshake than he ever had when Tracy and I were married. I introduced them to Cherry and Maddie, and though both Rhonda and Bill seemed a bit uneasy, I figured that was understandable after an 18-year marriage to their daughter. Since I hadn't contributed to the wedding plans, I felt it was best not to work the room, so we stayed mostly at our table as others came to us. But I'm not blind. I noticed the glances from people who knew me as they registered that I was with a stunning black woman and a charming Hispanic young lady. The wives of old friends in particular seemed to react as if I'd brought a trophy date to the event. And right on cue, Tracy and Bob, our hosts for the evening, made their way over. After nearly 20 years of marriage, I knew every subtle expression of Tracy's personality, and from the first moment she laid eyes on Cherry, I could tell she wasn't pleased. Was Cherry perhaps too black for her liking? Maybe. Too beautiful? Almost certainly. Was she likely envious of Cherry's toned figure and youthful look? Absolutely. And the real issue was probably that, in Tracy's eyes, Cherry was simply the wrong woman to be with me. With her thoughts fixated on Cherry, Tracy hardly seemed to register that this was our first close encounter in nearly a decade. She almost appeared to wake up when I stepped in and gave her a light kiss on the cheek. "Oh, Alex, I'm sorry. I was having a little trouble balancing in these new heels," she explained. "No problem, babe. You're looking great," I fibbed. "Come on, meet the family." I introduced everyone, Cherry, Maddie, Tracy, and Bob, giving Bob as warm a handshake as I could muster, and introducing him as the one responsible for my eventual good fortune. Everyone except Maddie winced at that, but my daughter shot me a mischievous look and squeezed my elbow. Did I mention she's perceptive? We exchanged small talk for about 5 minutes, skimming over the surface of things before Tracy and Bob moved along, making room for the bride and her new husband. Maddie gave me a slight shake of her head, signaling she was just as unenthusiastic about the encounter as I was. My other daughter, the bride, greeted me far more warmly than I'd anticipated, wrapping me in a long hug and beginning to cry, while my new son-in-law, Cherry, and Maddie stood nearby. I was completely caught off guard, speechless until she let go. "I'm sorry, Daddy, for everything," she said, sniffling. "I never fully understood what you went through, until I said my own vows a couple of hours ago. Right there in the middle of it, it hit me like a ton of bricks. What it must have been like for you when Mom cheated and broke her vows. I never got it before. I blamed you for your stubborn pride, just like Ethan did. But now I understand. Completely. You were right to stand up for yourself. And she was so wrong, not only for what she did, but for blaming you. How can I ever make up for all the pain Ethan and I caused you?" A lump the size of a football formed in my throat. I hadn't cried since tearing my knee cartilage in 10th grade football, but I came close right then, standing there with family around. "Well, for starters, introduce me to this fine gentleman you made those vows with, and then grant me the honor of a dance," I replied. "Oh, right," she said, a bit sheepishly. "You haven't met the man of my dreams. Mark Westinghouse, meet your other father-in-law, Alex Rogers, my real dad." Mark and I shook hands with genuine warmth, and I carried out my fatherly duty by warning him to treat my daughter well. Then I introduced him and Haley to Cherry and Maddie. While they all got acquainted, the band struck up a tune. "Daddy?" Haley asked, nodding toward the dance floor. "Delighted," I replied, taking her arm. The crowd, already abuzz from Haley's warm welcome, grew even louder as I escorted her to the dance floor. I knew that by this point I was unintentionally upstaging Tracy and Bob, but I had a lot of years to make up for. The band was playing what I think of as kid music, which I usually can't stand. But after years of dancing with a wife who loved it, I'd learned the steps. Haley seemed surprised that her father was such a Renaissance man, and we stayed out for 2 songs. By then, a good portion of the guests had gathered to watch us. After the second song, Haley gave me a big hug, the crowd applauded, and Cherry and Maddie were waiting nearby with big smiles. I pulled them both onto the floor, and the 3 of us joined in with everyone else. "Well, look at you, Mr. Rhythm," Cherry teased in my ear when she danced close. "Who knew that marrying off a daughter could be this much fun?" I replied, then turned to Maddie. "But let's wait a few more years before we try it again. I don't think my heart can handle this much excitement." "Spin me, old man," Maddie grinned. The 3 of us stayed on the dance floor for another 6 songs, and then I left them to grab a Jack over ice and take a break at our table. Watching Cherry and Maddie enjoying themselves, I didn't notice Tracy sit down beside me until she touched my shoulder, a touch I recognized instantly. "This should have been our moment, not mine and Bob's," Tracy murmured near my ear. "You threw away 18 good years. For what? You clearly didn't love me enough." I kept my gaze forward, not turning to look at her. "No, you clearly didn't love me enough not to go through with it, especially after I told you what would happen if you did. You didn't love or respect me enough. But hey, you got Bob in the end, and he's quite the catch, right? And I ended up with Cherry and Maddie. As the Rolling Stones say, you can't always get what you want, but if you try, you get what you need. You were a jerk then, and you're a jerk now. Maybe, but I'm a happy jerk who hasn't lost a minute's sleep over your mistake. And no, I wasn't expecting an apology. I'm good. Ethan re-entered my life when he got serious with a woman a few years back. It seems that fidelity becomes a lot easier to grasp when you have your own commitment at stake, so to speak. He called me out of the blue saying we needed to talk, so I invited him over to the apartment. When I opened the door, he was holding a bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. "Haley said you really like this stuff and figured I should bring a peace offering," he said as I let him inside. We'd only had a brief and somewhat tense conversation at Haley's wedding over 2 years ago. Although Haley and I had since reconciled, Ethan and I hadn't bridged that gap. "I asked my girlfriend Sasha to marry me, and it got me thinking about you and Mom," he began. "Haley's been telling me for a couple of years that you were the one who got hurt, not Mom. But I didn't fully understand until Sasha and I had the talk about trust and fidelity. I'm sorry, Dad. I was completely wrong. I get it now. I just didn't want to feel like I was betraying Mom." "I never asked you or Haley to take sides," I replied. "I just wanted you to understand why I had to leave, why I had no choice." We talked about everything over the next few hours, helped along by that bottle of whiskey. Cherry prepared a fantastic dinner, and the four of us spent the evening catching up. Ethan ended up sleeping on the couch because Cherry wouldn't let him drive after splitting a bottle with me. For this wedding, Cherry, Maddie, and I were seated at the groom's family table, joined by Haley, Mark, and our 2-year-old grandson, Brent, who sat next to Tracy. That arrangement kept Tracy included, especially now that she was alone. Bob had left her for a younger trophy wife about a year ago. Over time, the kids kept me updated on Tracy with brief snippets, but I told them it wasn't their job to be a communication link between us. We were both adults, and if one of us wanted to share something, we could pick up the phone ourselves. Maddie had flown in for the wedding. She's a freshman at Michigan State, but she didn't want to miss her big brother's big day, so I flew her in. She, Ethan, and Haley have developed a close bond, close enough that they can joke with her about being my favorite child. Watching the three of them together is interesting. The nature versus nurture argument seems to hold true in our case. Maddie and I share an unbreakable bond that even Cherry has noticed. Although I wouldn't wish our early hardships on anyone, those challenges have brought us closer than we might otherwise be. Adversity has likely brought Cherry and me closer too. We both understand that nothing should be taken for granted, and we cherish our time together as we navigate life as empty nesters. Cherry quickly figured out that an empty nest means no one in the next room to overhear, and she's definitely loosened up a bit in the bedroom. Hearing her express such pleasure nearly drives me into a frenzy, making me want to please her even more. Some mornings, we both head to work a bit stiff and sore from a lively night. After we'd taken care of the usual reception duties, Cherry and I hit the dance floor. Maddie joined in too, dancing with one of Ethan's groomsmen, but not before Ethan warned him not to mess with my dad's favorite child, a comment that made me grin. After about 6 dances, I started heading back to the table, but Maddie stopped me for one more dance. I couldn't help noticing that Cherry and Tracy had exchanged no words, even though they were within easy talking distance. "Feel the chill coming from that side of the room?" Maddie asked, as she came close enough to speak. Perceptive as always. When I finally returned to the table, Cherry got up and joined Maddie on the dance floor. A minute later, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Round 2, I thought. "Well, aren't you going to gloat about Bob leaving me?" Tracy asked as she leaned in. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," I replied. "This might surprise you, but I hardly think of you at all. I don't wish you harm, but I couldn't care less about your life now. We had 18 years together, and that ended long ago. I have a pretty good life now, and I choose not to dwell on the past or what might have been." I'd been watching the dance floor while talking, but now I turned to face Tracy. That's when I saw it, a trace of fear in her eyes. Fear of facing the later years of her life alone. It was just one more thing she hadn't considered back then, likely because she'd assumed I'd back down under her threats during the divorce. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy, but then realized that if the roles were reversed, she'd be trying to break my spirit without hesitation. "You know, I was in a hole then, and I'm still in a hole," I said, getting up from the table and joining my girls on the dance floor.